Investing in the UK property market is probably one of the best ways to ensure your money is working hard for you. This is due to a steady cash flow and a stable capital growth. How exactly do you do this, and what resources do you need to get started? Hi, I'm Justin Goldie, one of the founders here at Goldson Homes. We source, develop and manage properties here for our clients in the UK. Now today I'm going to be going through how you can invest in the UK property market and achieve significant returns by doing so. So how do you actually invest in property? Well, if you've done any research on property investment, you've probably seen the amount of different strategies that you can use to invest in property. However, I believe that there are three main categories, and all these different strategies fit into one of those categories. So the first one being buy to let. Now, obviously you get different types, but the most basic one would be buying a property, letting it out to a tenant and receiving a rental income from that. Now, a different type of a buy to let would be a BRR, buy, refurbish, refinance. So this would be a buy to let, but instead of just renting it out straight away, you get in there, do a bit of a refurb, lift up the value of the property, refinance the property to pull a bit of your money out, so you can use that money that you've pulled out to now invest in another property. So that would be the BRR strategy. However, it is very similar to a buy to let. The second type of buy to let strategy would be HMOs. So instead of renting the property out on a single let basis, so to just one single family, you would take the house and divide it up into, let's say, 5 bedrooms and rent out each bedroom on a separate contract. So a 5-bedroom HMO would have 5 separate tenants with 5 separate tenancies. Now, the reason you do this is because you can achieve a much higher rental income when you divide the property up with an HMO. So the last type of buy-to-let strategy that I think fits in there will be the serviced accommodation strategy. So essentially you'll buy a property in a more central location such as central London where there's a lot of tourists around, and instead of renting the property out on a monthly basis to a tenant, you'll be renting the property out on Airbnb and you'll receive a rental income from multiple different people on their stays. So the second type of category that you can do in property investment would be flips and developments. So a flip is essentially a property that is in need of quite a bit of work. So you go in there, lift the value of the property up through maybe doing an extension or loft conversion, or maybe even just putting a new kitchen in, a good lick of paint, and just bringing that value up and selling the property on straight away. Similar with a development, you'd buy a piece of land, uplift the value of that land by putting a few houses on there and selling the property, well, each property for a profit. And the third category is rent to rent. Now with rent to rent, you're not actually going to be purchasing any property, but instead you're going to be controlling property. So essentially what the rent to rent model is you find a property where there's an old tired landlord who doesn't really want the hassle of having to track the tenants, make sure they're paying, and is just a bit over being a landlord. You'd offer them a fixed rent for around 5 years, whatever you agree with them, and you would rent the property out from them. So let's say you rent it out for £1,000 per month. You'd then make that property into, let's say, an HMO where you get a 5-bedroom HMO out of that property, and your rental income, what you charge to each tenant, adds up to around £2,000. So once you've paid all the bills, you've paid him the rent, you have £500 left over, and that is all yours. So that is the rent-to-rent model in a nutshell. So once you've decided on the strategy that you're going to use with property investment, you then want to work out where you're going to invest. Now obviously, if you've been looking at property prices in the UK, you've probably noticed the discernible variations in property prices around the country, with the north offering some relatively cheaper prices and the south putting up some big numbers. So where do you actually invest? So this will actually depend on multiple factors, but I guess the most important one is how much money do you actually have to invest. Now, if you look at what a lot of people that have great influence within the property market are saying, they say that if you don't have a lot of money, you're better off starting investing up north because it is a lot cheaper. However, down south, you can actually find relatively cheap properties with good returns. So for example, we're actually looking at a property at the moment which is about an hour out of central London, and this is a 1-bedroom flat going for around £130,000. The rental income on this flat is £1,000 per month. So after cost, this is actually going to be returning quite a decent amount. However, if you do go up north, you will probably be able to find a 3-bedroom property for a similar price, but the rental income will be relatively the same. Now, this is where it comes down to what strategy you're actually going to be using, because if you want to do HMOs, well, you can't do that in a 1-bedroom flat. So if you go up north and you can buy a 3-4-bedroom house for £130,000, you'll be able to do HMOs up there. But if you want to do something down the south, maybe around central London, well, just outside of central London, a house out there, well, it's going to cost you around £450,000 to £500,000 minimum to be able to do an HMO in those areas. And the next thing to consider on where you're going to invest in the UK is how you're going to manage the property. Now, if you want to be more of a hands-on landlord and you are going to manage the property yourself, you probably want to be relatively close. So this will depend on how far you're willing to drive. For me personally, any property that's more than an hour drive from where I live, I'd be looking to get someone else to manage it. Now, if you want to be more of a hands-off landlord because you're already quite busy with family life and work life, you might want to consider a company like Goldson Homes. So essentially what we do is take all the workload of owning the property off your hands. To start, we'll help you by evaluating what strategy we think will work best for you. Next, we'll go out and find a variety of deals that work for your particular strategy. After you've chosen which property suits you best, we'll then help you through the entire buying process, after which we will then manage any refurbs or any works the property may require before we let it out. And our service doesn't just end there. We will continue to manage the property so that your hard-earned cash works even harder for you. Okay, so now that we've gone through the different strategies that you can use to invest in property and also what to consider when you're choosing the place to invest in the UK, now we need to go through what costs are involved when investing in property. Now this section can be divided into 2 separate parts, namely the actual purchasing costs, which will be the initial outlay when you actually purchase a property, and then the running costs of a property that you are investing in. So to start with the purchasing costs, the biggest cost you're going to have to pay besides the actual purchase price of the property is stamp duty, land tax, because of course the government needs their fair share. Now the standard rate on stamp duty is the first £250,000 will be at 0%. Between £250,000 and £925,000 will be at 5% on the purchase price of the property. The next bracket is from £925,000 to 1.5 million, and this will be taxed at 10% of the purchase price. And the final bracket is anything over 1.5 million will be taxed at 12%. So now there are additional rates. So if the property is not your primary residence, so if you're buying it as a buy-to-let property, you will have to pay an extra 3% on the entire purchase price of the property. This is the same amount you'll have to pay if you're purchasing the property in a limited company. So that will be 3% on the entire purchase price of the property. Now, if you're not resident in the UK and you're a foreign investor, you will have to pay an extra 2% surcharge on top of all the other stamp duties. So let's just do a quick example. So you buy a property for £300,000. You are a resident in the UK and this is not your primary residence. So you will be buying this as a buy-to-let purchase. So the first £250,000, you won't pay tax on that under the standard rate, and the final 50% you will pay 5%. Now, because this is an additional property, you will have to pay 3% on the entire 300,000. So it'll be 5% on 50 grand and then 3% on the entire 300,000. Now, if you are a foreign investor and not resident in the UK, you will have to pay an additional 2% on the entire 300,000 as well. So the next cost that you'll have to outlay when purchasing a property is broker's fees. Now, this obviously is only if you're purchasing the property using a mortgage, but I assume you probably will. Now, this cost can vary quite a bit depending on the value of the property and who you're using as your mortgage broker. Some mortgage brokers charge a percent of the entire amount that you're going to borrow, whereas others charge a set fee, but I'd average it on around £1,500. So apart from the actual broker fee, who's going to be finding you the mortgage, you're going to have to pay the mortgage company a setup fee for setting up the loan. Now, not all mortgage products actually have a fee attached to them, but essentially how it works is higher fees will mean a lower interest rate, and higher interest rate will mean lower fees. So there are actually some mortgage products that you can get which have zero fees, but on average I'd expect to pay around £2,000 for this. The next fee is a solicitor's fee. So you're going to be purchasing a property, you're going to need a solicitor to do all the conveyancing for you. Now, this can also vary quite a bit depending on the type of property. So if it's a leasehold property or a freehold property, and also the value of the property will impact the size of this fee. However, most of them average between £1,500 and £2,500. Another fee that is very important, and I'd highly recommend you do, is take advantage of a survey, because you want to make sure that this property is in good structural condition and is going to last for the entire time, obviously, that you want to invest in it, and that when you come to sell it later on, it's still in good condition. So a structural survey is going to set you back around £250. And last but not least will be a sourcing fee. If you do use a company like Goldson Homes, you will most likely pay a sourcing fee. However, this will end up saving you quite a bit if you use a reputable sourcer. Now, essentially, we'll go out there, find you a good property and get you a good deal. So paying an extra £5,000 for a sourcing fee when we've negotiated the price down for you is worth it. So once you've purchased the property, those will be all the fees that you will have to pay. And now you've got the actual running costs once you've got a tenant in the property. Now, the biggest running cost that you'll come into is an interest payment on the mortgage, obviously if you are using a mortgage. Now, this should be added to your running costs, even if the government doesn't think so. And the reason why I say the government doesn't think so is because of the new law, Section 24. Now, essentially what this says is that if you buy the property in your personal name, so not in a limited company, you cannot deduct the interest payments from your rental income. So you have to pay tax on the entire rental income, and you won't be allowed to deduct the interest payments as an expense. Whereas if you buy it in a limited company, you will be able to do so. This is another reason why I think buying in a limited company is very important. In any case, at the time of filming this, buy-to-let interest rates range between 4.5% and 5.5%. Now, the next running cost that you will incur when having a property is maintenance fees. Now, of course, this will vary quite a bit, and a property that is in very good condition, recently refurbed, is going to have much lower maintenance fees compared to a property that is 20 years old or has not had that much work in the last 20 years. The cost of maintenance will also depend on who you actually let the property to. For example, if you're letting the property out to students, you could probably expect the wear and tear on the property to be a bit higher. So you can expect to pay more in maintenance fees if you're letting it out to students every year. The next set of fees are lettings fees. Now, this again can be divided into two separate parts. So the initial lettings rate, which is the lettings agency actually getting the tenants into the property, and this will equate to around 4 weeks rent. Now, if you are going to be a hands-off landlord and you want someone to manage the property for you, so you can get the lettings agent to do it, or you can get a separate property manager in to do it, you can then expect to pay between 10 and 12% for management fees. Now, another cost that is particularly important, I think, to factor into your calculations before actually purchasing a property is the void period. Now, this is the period where the property may be vacant in between tenancies. So let's say between the tenancies, tenant moves out, you have a month before the next tenant moves in, you're not going to be receiving rental income. So I like to factor this into my calculations before actually purchasing a property, because it makes sure that the property actually returns really good even under a stressful condition. And last but not least, you have insurance costs. Now, if you are buying with a mortgage, you're probably most likely going to be required to have home insurance on the property. But a very overlooked insurance is rental income insurance. And this is going to become particularly important now that the new Labour government has introduced the Renters' Rights Bill. So the first reading of this bill has actually come out, and came out in September of this year. And basically what it does is it outlines stricter guidelines on landlords. Most notably, the regulations will change for landlords on evicting tenants, especially even if they are in rent arrears. So having that rental income will reduce the costs that you have to pay and essentially protect yourself. Now, depending on what strategy you actually use, there will be different running costs involved with each strategy. Now, because we have quite a bit of experience with HMOs, we'll run through the specific costs that come along with HMOs. So the first being the licensing fee. So to actually own an HMO and operate an HMO, you have to have a license. Now, the fee that a license costs varies from council to council. In our area, which is Guildford Borough Council, the fee is £940 and the license lasts for around 5 years. So essentially, the cost is around £16 per month. So the next cost that's actually specific to HMOs is the bills. Now, because you're renting the property out to multiple different tenants, you are going to be in charge of paying all the bills, which is another reason why you can get a much higher rental income, because all the bills are included in the rental price for the tenant. Now, this will include your electricity bill, your gas bill, your water bill, any Wi-Fi that you'd like your tenants to have, as well as cleaning, which I definitely could recommend for a HMO property. And last but not least will be the council tax, and you'll be responsible for paying all of these. So how do you actually go about purchasing a property here in the UK? Well, I assume a lot of people that will be watching this already own a property over here. But for those of you that don't own a property in the UK, or maybe it's your first time buying a property and you're actually doing that as an investment property, which would be a very good idea, I think, this is the process that you will go through. So firstly, what you have to consider is how you're going to finance the property deal. So are you going to be using cash? Are you going to be using a mortgage? Are you going to be using a bridging loan? You have to figure that out and figure out how much you actually have access to or you can borrow to be able to purchase a property. Once you figure that out, you can start looking for properties within your price range. But where do you actually find the properties? Well, you can look online, so sites such as Rightmove, or you can do some offline marketing. Alternatively, you can use a deal sourcer who has good knowledge within the area and is a reputable sourcer. Once you have found a deal that you like, you will then analyse the deal and submit some offers. So after you've submitted some offers, there will probably be some back and forth negotiation between you and the seller. Now, once you have agreed a price that you will be purchasing the property for, you'll then go through the conveyancing process. Now, your solicitor will take care of most of this, but there may be some input required from yourself. Now, once you've done this, this is when the completion and exchange of contracts happens, and then the property is actually yours. Now, this is the stage where stamp duty will have to be paid, and where you now have the access to the property. So you can get in there, do any works that are necessary before letting the property out and receiving that rental income. Okay, so I hope this video has been very helpful for you and has made you consider property investment even more. Now, if you are thinking of investing in property, but you are very stressed for time, I really recommend you to book in a call with us. You can do so by dropping a comment below and we will be in touch as soon as possible. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you would like to see more content based around property investment. As always, see you later.